Okay, well, great. Welcome to our second in our 2024 seminar series. And today we're going to talk about hormones. It's one of my favorite subjects, and we love helping people here with hormones. So it's something we're both really passionate about. So it'll give you an opportunity to learn our perspective on it. I do like to start out anything that I'm doing educational with some of the misconceptions and the myths out there and kind of debunk or demystify things. And so I'll lead with that. The first thing that, especially the older I get, the first thing that infuriates me is that insurance companies, speaking of insurance companies, are dictating women's health care, especially when it comes to hormones, when we can get tested, how often we can get tested. And I think it's really not educating, it's not education enough, it's not informative enough, it's not helping us really take charge of our health. And it's leaving pitfalls into the vulnerability of being overtreated or undertreated, not having enough understanding about our own bodies and what we should be doing as we age to be really involved in our hormones. So that's the first thing I want everybody to know. Please, I mean, we are doing assessments on hormones even in teenagers. It's as soon as you start puberty and your hormones are behaving differently, it's good to have information on that, especially if anyone is feeling a tremendous amount of fatigue or metabolism isn't right or they're not sleeping right. Certainly, these things can be associated with many imbalances, but ruling out hormones. And also once women do start some kind of hormone support, so that's another kind of myth and mistake is that there's a variety of ways to support your body hormonally. People don't have to do pellets or injections or even bioidenticals. There's a variety of ways. Now, in a session with Heather, she might recommend that you're doing something a little bit more intense and a little bit more prescriptive. But the downside that people are mistaken about, and she can speak to this too once we dive into this, is the monitoring of your hormones, right? So we don't need to be afraid of the support we do if we understand how we need to properly monitor ourselves, how we need to be supported. If you're having someone do prescription management, that doing that for hormones is handled a little bit differently. And if you're doing support, that you're really checking on that more frequently. So, because the risk again is being under supported or over supported, right? And so by having the most amount of information about how your body functions and then knowing how often you need to be checked, we're a little bit more involved than most facilities in making sure you're responding to the recommendations and that we can get you stable. And we go, okay, your body is now stable and it looks like your fluctuations don't happen so frequently anymore that we need to check you every 3 months. Depending on someone's age, we can go twice a year, once a year, right? But I think there's a lot of women out there who are suffering because they have heard that supporting their hormones is risky, or their doctor has told them they're not old enough to do that, or they don't need to do that, or their doctor wrote them a prescription a year ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, and they never had their hormones checked again. So there is a lot of misinformation out there. And part of what I love to do with our educational series, even when we're working one-on-one, is to really help people have better information and better awareness. Really, that education piece is what I'm most passionate about. So, and hormones is a big one. The other thing that I think that people don't understand is how connected hormones are to other things. So when we talk hormones, we're also talking about your adrenal health and your thyroid health. That's the first thing. If you're doing repeat hormones with us, you're going to get both those things looked at.
And metabolic health.
And what?
Metabolic health.
And metabolic health. So the second thing that's involved in your hormones is your gut health and your metabolic health. And people don't understand how their estrogen it's so affected by our gut health. And so the way we're managing stress with our adrenals is going to impact our hormones, but the way our gut is behaving and really the way our immune system is behaving. So postpartum can fluctuate issues with that immune system, that hormone system. And so it's a bigger conversation when we're doing the deep dive educationally for someone specific. We're going to be looking at hormones differently. So the way that I like to say it is we're doing diagnostic traditional testing. With Heather, that's looking at outside the cell. And when you do saliva testing and a functional panel on your hormone, you're looking at within the cell. That's kind of the simplest way to wrap your brain around like why it would be important to look at both. And so if you've never done a saliva panel on your hormone, you might want to because especially as we age, the way we use hormones is different, right? When we don't have a cycle anymore, that turnover is just very different. The peaks and valleys are very different. So again, if you're going to be doing something to support your hormones, you're going to need to know how you're using it. And we want to know what your baseline is even before we do that. So we want to know, are you really deficient in one and not the other? And so maybe that's going to change the support that you do, what it's telling us about your gut health and where else we need to look at that. Sometimes we're recommending diet. And in fact, diet is a huge piece of how we're talking about hormonal health because if our metabolism isn't functioning well, our hormones are going to be out of balance. There are specific things we eat or drink that are much more hormonally disruptive than other things. So that needs to be part of your conversation. But also understanding when you go to your doctor, if you're not sleeping or you're feeling hormonal, right, that it may be something completely different. And maybe it's not just an antidepressant. Maybe it is looking at your hormones, even though, you may be hearing somewhere along the line, you're too young to look at your hormones. As soon as you start puberty, you're old enough to look at your hormones.
Yeah.
And you really are. And so using birth control to normalize cycles because we shouldn't be looking at hormones, that's not necessarily in someone's best interest. So we're going to take those things apart. And if you have any questions while we're going through it, please feel free. We'll start with maybe let's start talking about the pill and what that does to women hormonally. This is a subject we haven't really talked about in our other. Sometimes we dip into hormones when we talk metabolically. Let's talk about this. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there, and Heather can speak to this, and then we can go to some other topics too.
So the birth control pill basically is just giving you synthetic hormones, and they're determining your hormones for you. So it's necessary in some instances, but not ideal in most instances. The other thing that's happening with birth control pills that we are recently learning as a medical community is that even if you take it at a younger age for birth control purposes, it's increasing this thing called SHBG, which is your sex hormone binding globulin, which isn't seeming, and this research is coming out now, to come down even after years. And so that's decreasing the free testosterone. So meaning decreasing the available testosterone for our bodies to be able to use, even years and years later. So that's an interesting new fact that we've learned. So now it's important if anyone is having testo issues or we're on the birth control to make sure you have your SHGB tested, so we can determine how much of your testosterone is bound up and unavailable to you. But yes, it has been practiced by GYNs to use birth control pills for perimenopause and menopausal symptoms. Um, and that's just not in women's best interest. So having synthetic hormones in our bodies is not helpful. They are synthetic. They are not friendly to our bodies. So we look at it from perspective of we're trying to support you from your own natural state and help your body continue to produce its own hormones as much as possible because we can still do that in our adrenals and in our gut even after our ovaries are tired. Um, and obviously we practice what's the safest way for our patients. Um, and being able to interpret the most recent medical studies um, accurately and for the age of the patient that we're looking at, because that big study that was scary was all older women.
Yeah. Can you speak about pellets, the risk with pellets or injections for men? I think that both of those things are.
So pellets are very effective. I have used them in other practices, but the problem with pellets and the women that we've seen here, or I've seen everywhere, is that you can't really control what happens. Your body uses them. Some people's bodies use them really well, and some people don't. It depends on your absorption and all these things. But once they're in there, you can't get them out. And so many women have this super physiologic level of usually testosterone. There's no research saying that that's safe. In men, we know it isn't safe, so I doubt it's a good idea. Women, it does make them feel better, and there helps their symptoms, and they like that. But if you were ever to do pellets, I would just ask you to make sure you have your level rechecked at 6 weeks after, which a lot of places don't do. So you can see how you respond. And then the next time, hopefully that provider can adjust how much they're going to put in for you. And then check it before you have the new ones put. Like many of my patients are just on an every 4 month cycle, but no one ever checks their level before they even put in more. So it's just kind of it just doesn't seem like optimal safe practice to me to do it that way.
Yeah, anytime you're putting something in your body, especially prescriptive, you want to measure the effect of that because, even supplements, we're measuring the effect and we're using data to make recommendations because when you're putting something synthetic in your body, there's no guarantee on how you will use it. And so, with testosterone, it's a quick and easy way to get a metabolic boost or to get a libido boost. But again, at what cost down the line? And if we're solving low T with just giving the body testosterone and we're not looking at metabolic health, we're missing a big piece of even how the body's going to use that because your visceral fat will rob the body of testosterone and then you don't even have enough testosterone to burn some of the visceral fat. So you can get pretty quickly stuck in a little bit of a loop. Estrogen, progesterones, they have their own loops too, but being educated about why your body is hormonally depleted and what your choices are a big way that you can advocate for yourself. Listen to it. It's my thing is that hormonal and part of why I think it's tricky for traditional medicine that practices under a diagnostic model. I think it's systemic and it's functional and it is going to go through these peaks and valleys, not just because we have a cycle, but because it is so connected to our adrenal and our gut health. And when we're not cycling, so the big piece we don't talk about or don't really understand in this culture is that when we're having a menstrual cycle, we're not just shedding the uterine lining. Our body goes into a detox. It's shedding other things. And so we are supposed to be having more along the lines of diarrhea. We're supposed to be emotional. We are shedding emotions. And women want to just like not pay attention to this. Culturally, there's a stigma on having negative emotions during our cycle, when really that's a purging, and really that's our body becoming much more intuitive, and we should be paying attention. What is it telling us? What are the message our bodies are telling us? And if we're not really going into that cleansing state when we're having a period, and our emotions can be stable, but if we're not having more of like a diarrhea, something could be metabolically blocking. Like some women are more on the constipated side, so their periods are heavier because their body's hormones aren't stable through the gut health, and the body's looking to detoxify differently. So that's a big thing that we need to be kind of aware of and talking about. And then as we no longer have a cycle and become menopausal, we're not doing that detox. So then it's more important to look at like, where are we getting detox from? How are we managing our metabolic hormonal health as a joint effort? When I first became really passionate about hormones, it was because I read the Dutch do such interesting studies, but their study was on how certain demographics, certain countries of women don't have menopausal symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
They just stop menstruating, right? You don't have any more eggs. This is really what biologically is happening, right? We're born with a certain number of eggs.
Mhm.
When we run out, I think they say in the first year, there's like a certain amount that gets assimilated back into the system. So the ones that we're born with is not really what we wind up with in the first year of life. There's first few years of life, there's some assimilation of it, which is super cool. But I think it's so cool when like I have two daughters, but that time you when you have a baby inside you, and if you're having a girl, you have the next generation, right? You have because their eggs are being made, and that's just such a nature is so cool and so magical, right? But the fact that other countries don't have night sweats and hot flashes and bloating and low libido, and it's like, well, wait a minute, like why is that happening, right? And so what distinguishes different cultures isn't just lifestyle. I mean, some of that is, but it's diet and lifestyle, right? And you're looking at Japanese women, right? That age differently and their longevity is differently before the whole westernization. But if in general that is different and they're not experiencing menopausal symptoms, even more proof how metabolically connected hormones are to we want to put a ton of products on our skin when in fact drinking water is the best thing you can do for the elasticity and the hydration for your skin, right? I mean, but that seems too easy, right? If we spend, then we do that $100 cream, right? I mean, that must be, right? You know, where we're going to get some of that. When really, too, even if you look at like those things, some of those things we're putting on our body, our skin, our hair are disrupting our hormones too. So we think we're helping the aging process when in turn we could be hurting ourselves. Um, so it is a big piece of the conversation that's not happening is that connection between metabolism and hormones and looking at that more closely so that we can maintain a quality of life. And it's certainly it's up to us, right? I mean, that's the thing about health. It's up to us, you know. I mean, it wasn't a lot of fun to realize a few years ago that um, that red wine would give me a hot flash. Right? Like it, I mean, I wasn't a big drinker anyway, but it was like, you know, like the little thing you want to do once in a while is the thing you go, okay, well, you know, or gluten, realizing that that is, you know, something that is going to change my internal regulation of my temperature. And then the question is, well, how long do I want to do that? I mean, if any of you here have experienced a hot flash, it's like the core body temperature from within. Like it's not like being hot on the outside. Oh, turn the AC. It's like you're on fire inside and you're like you can strip off your clothes if you could, right? So for me, it was like, I don't want to do that. And really kind of, working towards that.
I have a question. So if you have like say just a sandwich, regular sandwich, that gluten does something to the temperature, how long is that effect last? Will it last?
I mean, that's a good question, right? So if you, I think the easiest thing when I talk about issues is to talk in analogies, but right. So like imagine if every time you eat a hormone disruptor, you're pushing yourself towards the edge of the cliff, right? And so then it's a question of like, where do we fall off the cliff? How far into the hole are we, right? Like, what do we need to do to get ourselves back up? So, for me now, if I eat something and it does dysregulate my body temperature, then that's with me for maybe, the digestive period.
Okay.
Whereas before, when I was first going, okay, well, now I can't eat these things a couple times a week. Now I'm looking at them, maybe once a month. For now, it's like an exception because the way my body produces hormones, right? It's like I'm always closer to the edge of the cliff because of my age. And so I have made my diet that much stricter to pull myself as far back as I possibly can.
Yeah, I've noticed I'm having to leave more and more foods behind.
I know, right? I mean, that's the unfortunate thing. It's like, now as I'm like, 60's on that horizon, I'm like, okay, now I'm like, yeah, like I don't do caffeine anymore. I don't do alcohol anymore. Gluten is really rare. But it's also like, how do you want to feel when, like, on vacation now? I want to feel good. I want to have the most amount of energy to go do the most amount of sightseeing. It's like I'm not interested in a food coma,
Yeah.
which maybe I'm like, but everybody gets to define that differently. But food is such a big part that we're just not talking about. Like blueberries, like if there's one thing that women could do for themselves, it's eat blueberries. It's so good for the brain. It's so good for hormones. All those foods rich in color have phytoestrogen, and it's not like, oh, boys can't do those fruits and vegetables because there's estrogen in it. It's about the nutrient density that we eat that helps regulate those things. Like how far away from the edge of the cliff can we put ourselves?
Hmm.
So
For blueberries, do they, because I know they're available all year round, but like is it okay like in January to eat them like from South America? I know local is ideal, but
yeah, I mean,
okay.
all food sits on a spectrum, right? So quality does matter, but in terms of overall health, right? Like if you're standing in the grocery store and you go, if you've locked yourself into, well, those blueberries aren't organic, they're out of season, they're from Chile, I'm gonna go get cookies.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
That's not a, so yeah, I mean it's
So the
so we do
January
get
one,
stuck a
okay.
little bit, right? And I start to go at this time of the year, like I'm gonna look like a sweet potato. Like if I eat more sweet potato, like I can get like a little bit food fatigued. And we all do it, but I think it we need to think about like where it sits on the spectrum. Eating the apple out of season is always better than eating the packaged food.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
And sometimes we have to face the pesticides if we can't afford the organic. It's still better than the cookie,
Yeah, yeah,
so it's
very true.
trying to navigate those choices.
Mhm.
Environmental working group always does the dirty dozen, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the clean 13, 15, whatever that is, right? Um, but I also think we can't obsess. There's a time where people were like, there's guar gum or carrageenan, there's carrageenan in almond milk. You're gonna split hairs over that when you're still like going to Starbucks or having a Kit Kat, or like, I mean, we want to split hairs sometimes on things that
Yeah.
like really disable our ability to look at the big picture of how we're managing our health. Statistically, like when you look at what's the greatest gain for the least amount of effort, it's still in water versus anything else that's in the cup, and foods of color, fruits and vegetables. Like, and if you really want to help your kids be really healthy, that's where you focus too. It's like, okay, well, because we're going to do stuff we're not supposed to. In this country, it just seems to get worse, right? We keep accelerating the accessibility and the inexpensiveness of fake food.
The price
Mhm.
is.
And the price
Unbelievable.
is really, I mean, we are seeing teenagers hormonally imbalanced,
And with fatty liver.
and fatty liver, and I'm gonna put Starbucks up there as part of the problem. I mean, it is. I mean, I didn't grow up in high school having lattes. Like why we normalize that? Um, so we're normalizing hormone disrupting foods all the time, and then we're wondering why we're in a fertility crisis.
Mhm.
And then we're just gonna force the body with things that will help without talking about like what that's doing to the female body or what that's doing to children and multiple generations. And we just need to educate ourselves so we can make better choices. We still may choose those things. Still may choose to participate in what is essentially American culture or do things like IVF, but we should know more about what goes into these choices and what are the consequences of them so that we can go, oh, well, now I'm here and this is why. Right. Like even testosterone, doing some herbs that are more what we call adaptogens, working within the body, but also looking at like how we can increase exercise and reduce some of these hormone disrupting foods because you can't just flip switches and not look at hormones metabolically. Yeah. Sleep. Let's talk about sleep and the impact on hormones. How's that one? Yeah. We're big on sleep.
Yeah.
We talk to people about sleep now that we've talked about diet here. I know, I get it. It's, when the kids are asleep, it's like quiet time, it could be productive time, but we are just squeezing our adrenals when we do that, right? Like just squeezing them, squeezing them, squeezing them. And I get it, kids eating late at night because they've got practice and all that, but as we age, just really starting to look at like where you can prioritize yourself in that picture, you know, saying things like, okay, well, I'm gonna at least turn off the TV if I have to be up because kids are up. I'm at least gonna turn off the TV and reduce some of the sensory stress. What you're watching on TV. I think that sometimes, so getting your overall body into more of a recovery, peaceful state if lights out aren't going to be, before 11 or something of that nature, right? Looking at like as I age, sometimes I would make the dinner, have my dinner, and then my kids would get home 7, 8 o'clock. Um, my youngest daughter now, she's in high school. She's getting home from dance. She's eating dinner at 9 o'clock. I would be gaining weight so fast if I was eating dinner with her. But we'll still sit down together.
Have a cup of tea.
Yeah, have a cup of tea.
Yeah.
Having my chamomile tea or my vitamins. It's all whatever that
Magnesium.
is, right? Yeah,
Or
my
magnesium.
magnesium, right? You have to learn to advocate for ourselves. And this is also, I think, really important as women, right? We're sometimes advocating for ourselves or we're advocating secondhand or, we think that watching TV is recovery
Yeah.
day, and it really isn't. Um, so just looking at maybe even how do you advocate for yourselves? And where are you in your phase of life hormonally? So that you can go, how do I advocate for myself? How do I care for myself? What are some changes I could be doing as I am in this next decade or as I head towards the next decade? I think what I've noticed working with people, their health, they'll change decades and then they're like moving towards something by the mid-decade and then they're working towards the next decade, right? So if you turn 50, things might seem different around 50, but they might slowly progress to feeling different by 55. And so then that's your 50s, because then at 55 you're headed towards 60 and you should be pivoting again,
Mhm.
you know. So it's looking at each decade differently and going, okay, what does each decade present? And as I'm headed towards that, and then in it, what am I going to do for myself hormonally? Um, Thyroid, adrenals, right? That's all slowing down and getting tired. Um, I love the statement that your thyroid can get tired like your ovaries can get tired.
Mm.
And that just because I think, but your thyroid is also really your gut, and your brain's also your gut. Your gut is your like it's all connected. And that's the other thing is too, is the first thing that women need to understand is that we are a whole body and nothing is independent. When women come in, they're like, I want my hormones checked. Okay, well, the first thing is we're going to talk about your hormones completely different, because if you want your hormones checked, you need to understand your adrenals, your thyroid, your metabolism, right? And then sometimes it's not hormones, but we also think about hormones so narrowly, you know. It's like, no, it's got to be my hormones. And having a hot flash. Well, your core body temperature could be off because you don't detox, because your diet is off. Like, could be something else. Could be hormones, but
So what are the biggest hormone disruptors for like, let's say 40s, 50s?
I mean, it's for everybody, right? But it's alcohol, caffeine, sugar, gluten, dairy. And then, I mean, BPA's, right? The plastics and all that. But those aren't the, like, we can't go, oh, I'm like gonna always have my coffee in a metal or glass container because I don't want the BPA's, right? I'm gonna always have my wine. Like
Mhm.
it's still like again, that's like the seaweed in the almond milk. Like if we want to manage our hormones, we need to have the conversation about how often, because as our body becomes more hormonally imbalanced, those hormone disruptors need to really take a back seat. And in developing from 12 to 25, that prime adolescent puberty, like there's a reset that can happen in the gut with puberty, and the brain doesn't finish developing till early 20s. So there's that gut brain axis, but they say that there's a certain window you can reset the gut biome, like in the first year of life, the first 2 years of life. So we talk about like how important it is for infants in their brain development to have good biome. You get that opportunity with your preteen.
Mm.
And not most, some mental illnesses, they functionally talk about how some of them start in that biome, that that gut brain axis, where boys can be diagnosed earlier than girls because cognitively they're a little bit more advanced. Um, but they talk about how like some of those mental illnesses like bipolar and that get diagnosed in that window. And what are we doing to our kids, you know? I mean, I feel like I want to run around saying, you know, the cost of poverty, the priceless privilege, because um, we're not getting these nutrients into our kids that come from low cost families, yet we're with all these indulgences, we're disrupting the biome and the brain of all these kids that have access to these things that they're doing all the time. Starbucks all the time and Red Bull and energy. High schoolers pounding energy drinks, middle schoolers pounding energy drinks. When did that happen? When did we like not talk about how damaging that is to kids' hormonal development, their fertility, their brain development? Like, when do we not go that that matters, you know? I mean, the candy too, but candy's been around for a while. We just keep piling and piling and piling on it, and it is kind of interesting about that. Gluten, I mean, that's a tougher one, but like we need to set our kids up so they can drink responsibly when they're in college because their brain is in prime development. And these kids that go off to college and that's their time to experiment with alcohol is like we're not having those conversations about how disruptive that is to brain and hormone development. Uh, yeah, I mean, sugar, I think we've so normalized that we don't even talk about that as a hormone disruptor.
How is caffeine a hormone disruptor? Because I get alcohol, the God, the detoxing, the gluten is the God, but
I mean,
caffeine,
you could link it to a few things. I mean, it's kind of just this known, right? Like when we go, these are hormone disrupting foods. And I'm sure there's a ton of like research that goes into that. Off the top of my head, I would say like it's definitely hard on the adrenals, right? So, your adrenals sit in this sweet spot of cortisol. And if we're hot and heavy and overproducing cortisol, that's wearing us down. That's a form of adrenal fatigue. And then if we're like fizzled out, where we've fried our adrenals and we're sitting on the downside of that. And that tugs at hormones.
Right.
You know,
Pulls your progesterone,
yeah.
further lowering your progesterone if your adrenals are not working optimally
okay.
because they've been.
And then you've got that estrogen progesterone relationship.
Mhm.
If you're not producing cortisol smoothly, your DHEA may do something funny. DHEA gets really high with too much sugar and carbs, and then your testosterone production off the DHEA can dysregulate. And so if your DHEA is responding to cortisol, then that's also impacting your hormones. And then sometimes your neurotransmitters can be affected by the way your adrenals are performing, which then also is affected by caffeine. So that also then creates more anxiety. Like a lot of people that are prone to anxiety really need to rethink their caffeine intake. Or people that go, it doesn't affect me because I sleep fine. It interferes in the quality of your sleep. So you may not be REMing the way you think you are if you're doing caffeine because you think you can get to sleep and it's fine. Getting to sleep is only one part of what happens during sleep. And if we're not sleeping, we're disrupting our hormones too.
Yeah, a lot of our hormone production happens while we're sleeping.
And alcohol too. Alcohol seems like a relaxant, but even more than caffeine, it interferes in the quality of sleep.
Oh, yeah. For me, it does.
For sure.
Yeah. It affects neurotransmitter production. So we're impacting GABA receptors and some of our other inhibitory neurotransmitters, which then is going to affect the quality of sleep, which then we don't make enough hormones. So that's just one side of it. Coffee, caffeine are really big histamine producers that can affect estrogen production. So things that are higher in histamines are going to get stuck in like the way that visceral fat testosterone, right, and adrenal progesterone, then we get this estrogen histamine loop. And so then, and that can affect metabolism. It can affect the way the immune system performs. It can affect the way women are having cycles, women with heavy cycles, right? They may want to look at, again, their estrogen, and it's estrogen's tricky because you have to look at gut health to really have a clear picture of what estrogen is really doing. Immune health, gut health, thyroid health. Uh, because that can get pretty tricky pretty quickly. That's a good question. Other questions? Good question too. Yeah, questions. Anything you're dying to know? Or just want to know? Or what prompted you to come?
I just like to get all the information possible at the
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
But I found it very interesting to talk about resetting the gut for even my preteen. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, so when do I still have a chance? Okay.
Yes,
There's
yes,
always
yes,
give
yes,
an
yes.
optimal chance to be in a better position.
Totally.
So I'm thankful for that. Okay, great. Redirect, change some things. So I think that's very insightful.
Totally, totally. Because we're detaching, right? There's a natural progression, like, well, they're teenagers and they're gonna do this and that and the other.
Yeah.
But it's still an opportunity for us to set them up for
Yeah.
adulthood, for long term.
So we would want to focus on colorful,
Colorful
Veg-
foods, talking about the
sugar.
impact, just even having a conversation about what are your hormones. And most girls are only going to think in their teenage years, they're only going to think about hormones relative to their period. But having a conversation about what is happening to them during their period, how important it is to have loose to diarrhea stools, if they're looking at their diet, their water intake, if they're having headaches, cramping, are they hydrating, having better conversations around that. But then also, like, what are our hormones for, and what are hormone disrupting foods, and what does that mean to them down the line metabolically? What does that mean to them fertility wise? What does that mean to them mentally and emotionally? We talk to our kids about work ethic, and we champion them for the be great athletes and things of that nature, but our hormones matter to that too, right? It's if you care about the athletic performance of your kid, then you should be having a hormone conversation. How are they managing their adrenals? Are they in enough of a recovery? It's not just about push, 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 produce, muscle, muscle, muscle. It's the bigger conversation around our kids as athletes that has to do with, are they getting recovery? Are they getting sleep? Are they doing too much electrolytes? Are they doing too much screen time? How much does their athletic performance matter to them, in the sense of what are they doing when they're not, like, on the court, on the field, on the dance floor, whatever that is, right? So, but a probiotic, and all probiotics are not made the same, and some can really complicate things, but that's something to think about too, because that's the resetting the biome with the brain in that developmental period of time. So experimenting, you work with people that educate, providers that do that, that's great. If you don't, it's not a one size fit all, and you may want to experiment a little bit with it. Shouldn't bloat, shouldn't cause gas, shouldn't cause sticky toots, shouldn't constipate, shouldn't make somebody too loose. It should kind of feel, and rotating them, like every year, picking a new one. Those kinds of generalized things about probiotics, if you're not working with someone, can really be important for your teenager. There's, if you can only do like a couple things, vitamin D and probiotic, like if your teen is like, but if you squeeze a multivitamin in there, that's great. But
Lauren and Megan.
I was just gonna say, think it further and squeeze a little fish oil, right?
Brain.
Brain, gut, neuro, yeah. And they can make sometimes they're small, the big don't get those big honking fish gels if that's gonna be, not the right fit, but inch it along a little bit. And when we work with kids, and this goes for all of us too, right? In the quest for optimization, whether it's hormones, metabolism, quality of life, it's sorting out the things we need and the things we want, right? And talking to our kids about water and color foods. It needs to not be in the conversation with what do you feel like for dinner? Do you like pizza? What's your favorite ice? It needs to be in the conversation with you need to brush your teeth, you need to floss, you need to put your dirty clothes in the hamper. It needs to be in the conversation with these are all the things we talk about with our kids to be responsible, say no to drugs, right? It's that conversation rather than the one we want to put it over here with is like my friends and that like it's like even saying things like, well, if you eat more veggies, you might run 3 seconds faster. Like it's just, I mean, there's some scientific data that says that. So, I mean, all we have to do is look at some of these athletes that we don't spend enough time talking about their diet, right? Tom Brady, right? It's the reason why he's still standing, right? The longest, right? And yeah, Michael Phelps was amazing. We can't dispute his athletic prowess, but um, the high carb diet, how did that impact his mental health now that he's not detoxifying with that cardiovascular workout he's getting all the time? I mean, maybe he's having that conversation behind the scenes, but we're now starting to be candid about mental health with athletes. So we need to start talking about the impact that that's having on the impact that comes from their diet. Can't just burn it off and then that's okay. Talk about, well, how's that affecting your mental health, your hormones, quality of life? How's that setting you up while your brain's in this development, while your body's in this developmental state? What are you doing for yourself long term? The same way we might want to open a savings account, right? For our kids when they're younger, right? Teaching them good money skills, are teaching them good body skills and what is aligning them towards the future, which is grandkids for all of us, maybe, right? Isn't just about like, say no to drugs. It's talking about how anything can be an addiction. And how do we take responsibility for our bodies? And then modeling that too, right? But statistically, again, if we do more good things than avoid bad things, we can still make progress. Not going to get your kids to not eat pizza or not eat fast food or not go to Starbucks, right? And you shouldn't put them in that bubble because they'll go off to college and then just do those things anyway, and maybe in excess.
Yeah.
But boundaries is really important, and boundaries with food is the thing that will help them with the boundaries other places you want to have, like saying no to drugs and being responsible with alcohol and saying no to other things around their bodies. It's important for them to start learning that now. Madeline Levine, she wrote a book called Teaching Your Children Well. Originally, she launched that. She's an educational psychologist at Stanford. Originally, she launched it for her colleagues, and then it hit mainstream, was hugely popular. But she talks about how we're the traps of raising entitled kids and the things that we probably want to think about differently in anticipation of that. And it's along the lines, I took a seminar when my oldest was really young, and the takeaway was by the time they're 9, they're halfway to 18. They should be halfway responsible and halfway knowledgeable enough. Okay, right? Like who is thinking back by 9 of it, right? Who's even thinking by 12, we've got 3 years, 4 years before a driver's license, and where all that fast food is now available, all that socialization, right? So we've got to start talking to our kids about this kinds of stuff. And I don't think it's taboo to start talking about hormones differently. And not that our boys are going to become muscular and have to shave and our girls are going to have a period, but talking about how it's affecting their brain, why sleep's important, why diet is important as brushing our teeth, and why we need to learn about hormone disrupting foods and not just learn to say no to drugs. So I think it's not just our health as women, but our children too. That's what I love about doing these talks because we never know where we're gonna go.
Yeah.
And like starting out, I would have never guessed writing the talking points for the talk we'd be talking about teenagers. That's cool.
Mm.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah.
Acne, since we're talking about acne, right? Acne is very involved in a lot of different things. We can think it's teenage acne is just hormones, and there's a hormonal component, right? But are those hormones in that teenage acne associated with adrenal imbalances? Is it associated with true hormonal imbalances? And then what part of the gut is impacted, right?
Yeah.
There's estrogen, then there's going to be histamine and gut issues. It's like looking at all that,
Dairy and sugar.
I was just gonna say dairy. Dairy, how much milk, right? We think, oh, cow's milk, you gotta get those bones healthy, you're growing. Yeah, like a lot of that calcium's not even accessible to us. It's in the cow's milk, but I mean, the digestive system is twice, and like we're not meant to absorb that correctly, so it's unavailable to us. And looking at other sources of calcium and also again the hormones and how that's affecting.
So many hormones in dairy, even like so for our kids, but for us, for adults also. We're exposed to so many, even organic dairy, even the dairy that doesn't have the injections that they claim on the label, like we're still exposed. I think it's at least more than 100 ways of being exposed to hormones through dairy, even with organic. Shoot, so
Even with organic.
Dun 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 and drop the mic. I love that. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Look, here's the thing about cow's dairy. And I mean, we all love cheese, right? Okay. So, but it is breast milk from a large animal meant to grow another large animal even larger. And we are the only mammal species to rob another mammal of its breast milk for its young. Like, it violates the laws of nature, right? I mean, it really does. And so it has to be the right thing for that person for a specific medical issue, you could say, or functional imbalance. Like there's a reason why if someone's consuming it, and it has been recommended by a provider, but really women, hormonal women, no business doing dairy. Anybody wanting to lose weight, no business doing cow's dairy. It is not our source of calcium, even if you're facing osteopenia or osteoporosis. It is not usable to us. It is our metabolic enemy.
too fast.
Yeah.
Too inflammatory.
Yeah, I know, right?
What do you recommend for like osteoporosis or for teenagers, like calcium to make the bone strong? I mean, like what sources?
So the first thing, and then we'll take one more question, then we're gonna close. But our bone health is about the density of all trace minerals. So things like we carry a product called Energy Boost Fulvic Minerals. Again, foods of color increase the integrity of your muscle and your bones. These things are so important. They did that study with Roman gladiators and they were vegans. They were given the most amount of color foods. They weren't given dairy, they weren't given protein. And these were the top athletes of their day. So vitamin D is really important because it helps your body absorb calcium. Calcium supplements, if you take them, have to be bioavailable because we don't want to grow calcium on the outside of the bone. And the bone inside is porous, right? Which again, the density of the bone really matters. If you're interested in bone health, Dr. Susan Brown, thank you. She studied with the Germans early on. She talks about the acid alkaline balance with regard to the integrity of bones, right? If we are too acidic, we are going to deplete the density of our bones. And she's got some great, I think, Bone for Health or something. If you Google her, she's got some great resources on her website. And one more question or a comment or
Night sweats.
yes.
Is it
Could be low testosterone, low progesterone, low estrogen, too many histamines. Could be core body temperature with glycine, could be a nutrient deficient. You would want to explore all those things, or you could just be consuming something that is a hormone disruptor in excess, and by the time you go to sleep, it pushes you over. But also, our core body temperature wants to drop to 68 degrees when we sleep. And if you're keeping your bedroom warm and toasty at 72, you're going to night sweat as you become hormonal. Like that's just going to happen. But do a food diary, track those hormone disruptors in relationship to when you're going through it. See if it's that.
it's close to my period?
Well, your estrogen is surging then, so that's possible. So you might want to look at like, again, how many of those hormone disrupting foods, what's your histamines like in general? And
How do you
have your
measure
hormones checked.
histamine?
Check, because they might not be balanced.
Yeah, they might not be balanced.
How do you measure histamine?
You can't measure histamines, but you can look at a low histamine food list and
Mm.
determine like how much onto the high side you're eating.
Okay.
And look at like, oh yeah, when I do, because I mean, meat sweats, like you'll hear people talk about that, they're high histamines, right? Low quality meat can be a little bit of hormone disrupting, but dairy, alcohol, sugar, coffee, they're all high histamine too, which is another way it can be impacting hormones. But if you're having frequent night sweats, have your hormones checked. Do the biggest dive you can if you've never had your hormones checked. Looking at blood and saliva, that'll give you the most information so you know which one or combination is contributing to it. And then look at like what you're doing to add gasoline to that fire.
Insulin resistance also impacts.
I
night
have
sweats.
checked them, but I see to find that different providers, they don't care whether you do it on the 21st day or they just have different opinions. So what is the right way to do it? If you do it blood, is the 21st
Well, the
day?
21st day is the best day to look at progesterone.
Okay.
The rest of the time, progesterone's like should be pretty non-existent. So then it's hard to determine your progesterone status if it's not during those last 14 days, day 21 being where it should be peaking.
Mm-hmm.
Estrogen has 2 peaks, so we can kind of calculate that more. Testo doesn't necessarily
I know,
have
yeah,
peaks as
it
much, so
doesn't.
we can check
Yeah.
that anytime.
Yeah, that
Um,
it doesn't.
And then cortisol definitely should be saliva. I mean, we check it both ways just so we can monitor it over time with the treatment that we're doing, so we don't have to keep doing saliva testing every 3 months. It's more affordable. But yes, that's the answer.
Thank
But like she said, there's hormones inside and outside the cells, and that is dependent on how we metabolize them. So if you can do both, that's the best option.
Okay.
But we can help our hormones ourselves be better by doing all the life
Mhm.
balancing things we talked about, recovery time, getting rid of the foods that impact it so well, and just tons of vegetables really help detoxify the estrogen that we need to get rid of that's dangerous for us, and heal our guts so that everything else can produce as it should be producing.
Mhm.
So tons of colorful green leafy cruciferous vegetables, water. Very important, getting rid of dairy, even factory meats.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us, and
Thank you.
I hope